Hey, I want to talk to you about decentralization protocols, specifically for social media, and what they mean and how they work. We're not going to be looking at application level specifics, things like Mastodon and BlueSky or Threads. Those are all implementations of the protocols. I want to look a little lower into what the protocols actually mean, how they're implemented, and then some pros and cons of each one. I'm not an expert in some of these areas. I've been reading the specs over and over again. I've implemented a few kind of lightweight things in both of them. And this is my understanding based on July 2023 of where the protocols are at and how they work. So let's dive right in and look at the first one, ActivityPub. Now, ActivityPub has been around for quite a while, actually, and it is the most mature of all of the decentralized protocols that I know of. It works based on activity streams, which is another spec, and these things all are kind of layered on top of each other to let servers communicate with each other and lets users and applications use that protocol without needing to think about it too much. When I really look at activity streams, it looks like an RSS feed written in JSON. It has some external links of where the data actually lives, but for the most part, it's just a stream of data that is accessible, that links to other documents, and it's in JSON format, whereas RSS feeds were all in XML. And so that's maybe one nice new thing to have a different, more recognizable data format for some of these apps. But in reality, an activity stream is just data that goes out. ActivityPub is meant to be a publish-subscribe model where someone publishes information and a bunch of people subscribe to it. And the thing that ActivityPub adds on top of that is reverse communication, where a normal pub sub, you just get subscribers that are reading the data, but they're not really publishing back to the data. And pub sub or ActivityPub in this case is actually a two-way RSS in a lot of ways, where data is being pushed out to these places and then data is coming back in and added back into the source data. Things like likes and follows and comments, those get streamed back, and the person creating the data comes back and adds those things in. ActivityPub is a W3C published standard, or at least a recommended standard, and it hasn't changed a lot. This last published date was 2018. So you would think at that point it's pretty stable. We can use it for various things. Okay, so I'm a visual learner and I want to draw this out to make sure I understand it, and we'll see if it helps you understand it too. And so in ActivityPub, we have a server, and the server exists to send and receive data. And on that server is, let's just start with one user. And this user has things like an inbox and an outbox. And those are the main ways that other servers interact with it or other users interact with it. And as things come in, requests come in, things like followers, comments, likes, those all come into the inbox, and things that the user publishes go out from the outbox, and they go, they go out from the outbox. Like it doesn't actually like come from the outbox. The server just makes a request somewhere else, and we say that's the outbox. But that's not actually like a thing. So if I have another server with a user on it, again, this one has in and out. And so this user over here wants to follow the user in the red server. And so this user is going to publish a follow request over to the other server. And these servers are talking to each other. And the way it validates those things is each user has some keys associated to it, their certificates, that allow it to say, this is my identity. And so when you look up that user, you're supposed to validate those things. Whether that actually happens or not is up to implementation. You don't actually have to validate anything. That's just part of the spec of who I am as my identity. The other thing these users do is they have what's called dots, well-known, and what's called web finger to identify where the person is, like what their username is, aliases they have, that sort of stuff. WebFinger helps you identify a user based on this well-known path, and then you query the user. And it's actually one of the things that I dislike about ActivityPub is WebFinger by itself needs an active server. And that's one of the things that I kind of dislike about ActivityPub is WebFinger in general, just using URL parameters for a lot of things where you want to look up some information. It's not path-based. It's using these parameters, and you can look up information multiple different ways. So one is path to something. So you just like, it's on the URL path. The other one would be like path with a URL parameter and 2 equals something. That's how a lot of ActivityPub works. The third way is actually just like shove that information into the data that gets sent. So you would just hit path, and your JSON has, or your data, whatever you're sending, is to something, right? You can send all that data and request this data different ways, and ActivityPub uses both. But in a lot of cases, this one, the parameters and this one over here of sending the data both require active servers to interpret the data coming in and then do something as a reply. The path-based one is the most lightweight. You don't need an active server. You could just say like, oh, but paths get out of control. And this is roughly how ActivityPub and any service built on top ActivityPub works, is it has these actors that interact with each other between these servers. Some questions I have about ActivityPub is things like if this server over here gets hacked, right? Like someone takes over that and they have access to the files. They can now see everyone's private keys, and they can make outbound requests signed with those private keys. That's not owned by anyone else. That's not, right now, there's no implementation that I have found that allows a user to pull their data out or to trust in external certificates outside of running your own instance. And so if you want to own this portion of the data, you have to go run and maintain your own server that gives you all the other pieces. As servers scale up, you just get more and more servers that all need to talk to each other, and making an entire mesh out of who's talking to who in the communication between them. And that is really hard to scale sometimes, because now instead of talking from one server to another, this instance over here needs to be able to handle all of the other inbound requests from all of the other servers. And so a lot of times how, at least with something like Mastodon, how isolation works or filtering is you just block off certain servers. You're like, you're not allowed to talk to me. You're not allowed to talk to me. And so if you're a user on this server, you don't get to see everything, because either this server can't scale up, or because they've chosen not to interact or allow interactions from specific instances. And so if you somehow disagree with, all of a sudden you're like, oh, you know what? Like, I want to talk to that server over there. Those are my friends. I don't agree with the moderators of this server. You don't really have a choice but to just leave the server, and you have to go say, okay, well, I'm going to go sign up over here. And because those certificates to sign your information are stored on individual servers, when you go to a new server, you have to be a new user over here. You can't carry your username. The thing that does is transferable is aliases. And so your new user over here will say, oh yeah, you used to be that user. So someone coming to this server looking for you, or someone going over to this server looking for you, will be redirected. Or someone coming over here looking for the old alias will say, oh yeah, no, they're over here now. They're on this new alias. And so that works. But again, if a server gets hacked, you can't really do anything. You can't trust anything about it, because you don't own that data. And if this server goes down, if it's all of a sudden like, hey, we couldn't handle the load, the server's gone, you can't migrate anything, because ActivityPub, to be able to migrate users, requires an active connection or an active server from the old instance. The other thing that doesn't come over is all of your posts. All of the data that you created over here does not transfer to a new server. The things that do transfer are the metadata about you, your alias and your followers. And that's basically it. So when I transfer over to this other place, I get my follower account, or at least they get told that, hey, by the way, you're moving, here's the new alias, update your records. But all of the data, if I spent years and years building out this data and having a bunch of posts there, I just lose them if I want to move. And so that's a big risk, whether it's hacking, whether it's servers going down. All of those things do not transfer in ActivityPub by the way it's designed. So now let's look at the AT protocol, which was developed by BlueSky as the application that implemented it. And it's the only application that implemented it. And a lot of these things are theoretical, I will say. So AT protocol right now does not have any of this implementation detail like ActivityPub has. ActivityPub has multiple active applications built on top of it that are implementing this the ActivityPub protocol. There are downsides in that design, but that they work. We know they work because people are building on it. @protocol has one application called BlueSky that has currently no federation. But the documentation separates out some things that I really like in how it did it, just because of some of those concerns that I had about ActivityPub. So let's try to draw up at least my understanding of how @protocol will work when decentralization is available or there are multiple instances and applications built on top of it. Again, this is theoretical based on the documentation. The @protocol and BlueSky right now have effectively one server. They have one application that's built on top of it, and you can't run your own right now. The code is open source. You can create an instance, but then you are an isolated instance that does not talk to other servers. And most of this information that we'll go over is available on their overview, the protocol overview, which touches the high level points of how it works. But we'll dive into a couple other things as well. So they have a bunch of good graphs on if you just want to see like, okay, how does it actually work? But the first thing that I really like about @protocol, and by the way, @protocol stands for Authenticated Transfer Protocol. And so the thing that they do that's different than Mastodon is they separate out what it means to have an identity and what it means to have data. So the first thing that I have is a DID, or a decentralized identifier. And again, this is a W3C standard. And so and this one is fairly recent. The thing that a lot of people don't like about this, which I'm a little iffy on myself, is it's mainly used in things that are blockchain based or crypto apps. And in the whole Web3 era of this is how decentralization identity works, it can be used for other things, and that is what BlueSky is using it for, as far as it's just a web address. It's some globally unique web address. And so I have this DID that is mine, and it follows me everywhere, and there should be ways to transfer this ID to another to kind of change those aliases, but it's not actually that important because I can change it over time. The other thing I have is a personal data server, and this is where my data actually lives. And so whenever I'm creating documents, they go in this personal data server. And granted, the data itself may not live here. The like videos and pictures, those probably exist somewhere else just because of the sheer size of those files. But the PDS is where the structure of how to find that information exists. And the same exact thing works for ActivityPub. ActivityPub, all of my files are usually stored somewhere else, right? It's stored in S3, but those files that link a post to an image, those are going to be in some caching layer or something like that. It's not actually in the server itself. So with these two things, I have this server or a group of files, because this PDS, the way they structure the PDS is called a Merkle tree, which is how Git works. If you're familiar with Git and storing a history of data and being able to verify that data and link that data one to another, this is a Merkle tree that has signatures. And so I actually sign that data as I'm creating it. So all of my posts will have some signature, and post 1, post 2, whatever it is, but they're laid out in basically a file system. And I can read those as I normally would files when I have this personal data server. And the DID is web-based, and in this case, it's going to be globally unique. And right now, in BlueSky at least, they allow you to pick a URL, a web address that is universally unique. And so if you go on BlueSky, my username is justingarrison.com, which is my domain. That's the domain that I've owned for a very long time. That's my blog. And this allows me to keep that address because it doesn't matter what server I'm on or what application I'm using. My address is globally unique. In @protocol, I have to move my ID based on what servers I'm on and also what applications I'm in. So if I'm using the PeerTube, which is the ActivityPub YouTube clone, or Mastodon, I have to pick different users, and those don't tie together in any sort of way because there's separate entities completely. They're separate servers, they're separate implementations of ActivityPub. In @protocol, I get one PDS, which works with all of the apps in this world of decentralization. So it would work with things like BlueSky. It would work with a YouTube version of built on top of @protocol, and my ID stays the same. And that's a really cool feature because if I own that server, if I run it and I maintain it and and secure it, I'm responsible for that data, but I also have the freedom of not worrying about like, hey, how did that application secure my data, or who owns the keys? A PDS would allow me to own all of that information. The one tricky thing about that ownership here is I always think of ownership as I can create it, but I also can delete it. And in this case, right now with App Protocol, you can't delete things necessarily. Things exist forever. They might get unlinked from the tree of, hey, this is available. So if I go to someone's, username and look at all their posts, they might unlink some posts, but at the PDS level, the data still exists and that post is still there. And so the URL at the application level might unlink, but if I crawl through the data, just like a Git tree, like I can go find things in Git that aren't actually linked to things. They're orphaned files or orphaned branches, those sorts of things. They exist and I can find those things. And a PDS, because it's based on the same thing, you can still find that data. And so deleting things doesn't go away. And that's another drawback here of making things public in this PDS that never deletes itself, is when you like something, that like exists forever. That like is there on your account that says you liked a thing. So I could unlike it later and that gets transmitted to someone, but like the history of me liking and unliking something still exists. And that might be a problem. But I will also say that is a problem for ActivityPub as well. One of the reasons why you can't transfer yourself from one server to another and bring your posts with you is because all of these posts were made in the past. And if I can export my posts, but then when I import them somewhere else, I would have to ask them, hey, can you rewrite history for me? Can you go back and pretend that I've been here for 10 years and rewrite all of those things for me? When you run your own server, you can do that at a database level. You can say like, just merge these in and they've always existed, but you will likely interrupt other people with their posts and possibly even like URL conflicts or whatever. Just, there are things that can happen when you're importing a bunch, like 10 years of old data that may not be a good idea. And so that exists in both protocols as it stands today. And so how does my data that's stored on my PDS make it into an application? And this is the other part that I think is scalable in a way that's linking every server together maybe isn't. And so what ActivityPub has is they have this like indexing layer. They have servers that are owned by an application basically that go through and read the data from a PDS, and you can push data into it. You have ways that you can like actively say like, hey, I made a post or whatever. You don't have to wait for an index, but this index is where everyone's data ends up being sucked in for an application to see. This is an application view of what all the data exists that applies to this application. Because again, my PDS here could have BlueSky, it could have YouTube, it could have blog posts, it could have whatever, but not all those things are relevant to this application. And so we layer that on top of PDSs, and this is a per application crawler, which will go through and get all of that information from all those PDSs and index it and then present it as an application layer available for an app to view. So my app's actually out here, and my app is going to be diving into this crawler to get all that information. And so this is actually where the expensive part lives of most of the applications. The PDS is actually really cheap because it's just hopefully just files, maybe a couple small things, but I don't have to talk to a lot of things. Crawlers can abuse their ability to crawl your PDS, and anyone could try to like DDoS you and just request everything. Those are things that maybe aren't good about the architecture, but that's exists on web servers today. That's not like a unique thing here. And so these crawlers go through and they get all that information out, and the application reads it from the crawler instead of the PDS. So as more and more PDSs are created, the crawler gets bigger, which is where the application runs that, the centralized point of application. And so if I have another app, my crawler 2, I'm going to read that stuff and then present it in a different app. And the way this actually works at the PDS level is you have what's called lexicons, which is getting frustrating, just like that we have to call it something different. But it's basically a structure of data and calls in the URL that allow the crawler to know your PDS implements this application, and I can get information from that. And so the only example that exists today is app.vsky.star. And so if I implement that lexicon on my PDS, then the BlueSky crawler, or things that use the BlueSky crawler, because these don't have to be unique per app, is going to be able to get that information out of my PDS. And so things here like posts and whatever else, we can see in their docs how they implement it in a bunch of their calls for the lexicon for the BlueSky. So BlueSky feed, here's what it looks like. And these are supposed to be published. The lexicons are published so that anyone can see what data is in it and then either reuse that lexicon for what they need or implement their own based on they need some other type of data. There's also a bunch of lexicon paths that are just at protocol based. And so they're things for like administrative purposes, for ID lookups. They call out like login, log out. Those sorts of things should probably be at a protocol level, but not necessarily required for every application. And then beyond that, they implement or call this thing called that XRPC, which is just a way to say that like they call these lexicons based on a path. Instead of using parameters like ActivityPub might, I'm going to implement the lexicon with an XRPC endpoint and then com.justingarrison.com. Actually, that's com. Com's already there. Sorry. Justin Garrison whatever. And when you want to call that, you're calling that path, and that's part of the files here. So in my PDS, I basically need to structure my data or have a way to look up my data in that path formats. And you could do that either by just copying the data twice, or you could do it by having an active server that actually translates that data between different lexicons. There's different ways you could implement that, but I like the fact that in this level or in this style of decentralization, I'm not actually responsible for talking to every server that exists and every other PDS. That all goes through this crawler and application layer, and I'm just responsible for the data I create and securing that data. I also really like the idea of globally unique DIDs, where I don't have to go, whatever new app comes out, when Threads just came out, I don't have to rush and get my username, right? Like I already own a domain, and that domain is mine, and if it used DIDs, I wouldn't have to do anything about it. Just if I ever want to sign up for Threads, I can use it. And that actually brings me to my last topic here about how do these other applications that exist integrate into existing decentralized networks. And so we already have heard that like Threads says they're going to use ActivityPub, Tumblr says they're going to use ActivityPub, and then over here is Mastodon using ActivityPub, and even things like if I want something with the app protocol, like how are those things going to interact together to be usable? And one of the things that's really interesting is ActivityPub is all this outbound communication between server to server, and it sends some data back. It's this two-way RSS effectively, but nothing stops you from implementing new things within your application. So I can guarantee you that Threads is going to implement things that aren't available on Mastodon. They're going to have features that you can't do from an app protocol level with Mastodon, and they're going to keep that for themselves. Someone equated this to green bubbles and blue bubbles, right? Like iMessage on an iPhone, I get a lot more features. I get higher resolution images, I get typing notifications, I get send screen, all fancy things, right? Like all of that is within iMessage, but once I go out to a text message, I lose all that. Like it's just like, hey, I can send you a message and you can reply to that message, but all of the features are not there. And so Tumblr is going to have different things that are only available on Tumblr, and Threads are going to have things that are only available on Threads, and they're not going to work everywhere. It's not going to be something that's just like, oh, it's ActivityPub, it works. I was like, no, like ActivityPub is just how these services might interact together at a lowest common denominator, at what is available in the spec to be able to send and receive messages. But in all three of those cases, anything ActivityPub, your data still exists with the server. You cannot transfer that between, I can't take my Mastodon data and go over to Threads. I can't take my Threads data and go to Mastodon. I'm not going to be able to do any of that because I don't own the data. That is all part of a server. And even if I'm on Mastodon, they might choose to block Threads completely and say like, oh, well, sorry, we don't want that here on the server for a variety of reasons, because it's expensive to run a Mastodon server. You can read my blog post, which is mostly about running Mastodon costs too much money, and people do not have the money or time to run and secure them. And now that Threads is around and Tumblr, they can just crush any Mastodon server they want by sending too much data. And I would have to greatly increase my Mastodon server. So I have a feeling a lot of them are just going to block it. They say, I can't do that. And so we're just going to stay Mastodon only. And Threads is going to have to be somewhere else. So you have to find a Mastodon server that interacts with those other services if you want to be able to get some communication back and forth. How they would work with an @protocol style implementation, which again, this is all theoretical, none of this actually exists, is we have our crawler here that goes into BlueSky, and they would have to present PDSs for each user that the crawler can come fetch data from to be able to bring that into BlueSky and then send it back to the PDS as likes and those sorts of things happen. But again, this could be a lowest common denominator situation where I don't actually get all of the things that I want out of that application because they're going to implement things that aren't available anywhere else. So that's it for this video. I hope it helped you understand some of the trade-offs that were made in designing both of these protocols and how the infrastructure works a little more. Again, if you want to check out my blog post about Mastodon, it's in the show notes. I also have another video about creating a Mastodon instance in 2 static files, and I've mostly abandoned that by now because ActivityPub needs an active server, and my goal was to make this in as passive a way as possible. And I don't think at this point that that's going to be possible with ActivityPub. I think it might be possible with @protocol to be able to just serve static files from a directory somewhere on a web server, but I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to do that without having an active server, and especially this two-way communication. I need some way to receive my comments and likes and those sorts of things to be able to store them with the data, and I don't see a way to do that without any sort of active component, which is okay for now. But my initial goal of actually setting up a Mastodon-like interface for my blog is something that I'm not pursuing anymore. If there were things that I got wrong about either of these protocols or didn't understand, please leave a comment because I'm trying to learn more about them and it's really hard without getting into the weeds of both. One thing I will say that I find pretty interesting is almost all integrations with Mastodon happen at the ActivityPub layer because that is where the libraries are. That's just the protocol that they say. They don't integrate with Mastodon by crawling the APIs of Mastodon. That's kind of frowned upon in that environment because Mastodon servers are so expensive and that costs them more money. So they talk at the ActivityPub lower level. But all of the integrations that I've seen with @protocol are just building on top of BlueSky. And BlueSky is the only app for it, and they don't talk at the @protocol level, partially because PDSs and crawlers and that stuff isn't available yet. But every integration has been a BlueSky integration versus an @protocol integration. And there are builders that are crawling PDSs, like getting information out of them to see like likes and those sorts of things based on what happens at the PDS level. But almost everything is going through BlueSky in some way. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.